I find it fascinating that sewing knowledge has been handed down through the centuries. Grandmothers and mothers have passed down knowledge to us. Each generation adds something to the art of sewing, techniques that make it easier or faster or even more beautiful. I have loved teaching sewing in other countries, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Canada, and Africa. I have gained knowledge in each of these places. Join me in my sewing room today and let's explore the wonderful world of sewing. We're going to have a lot of fun. I am so pleased to have as my guest today my very dear friend Evy Hawkins. Evy is the owner and designer of A Bit of Stitch. Evy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha.
Tell us about this wonderful jacket that I'm holding. I know you made.
Yes, I did. That's done on the Sashiko machine. You've seen this new machine?
I have. I saw it right before it came out. I'm excited. Now, this is done on what fabric?
That's done on silk velvet, and I call those sassy pleats.
Sassy pleats?
Yes.
How pretty. And then the jacket comes on down with a beautiful machine embroidery. And then, Evy, you've even taken this beautiful designer touch with your sassy pleats to the cuff of the jacket. Oh, Evy, talk to us about this wonderful Sashiko.
Well, are you familiar a little bit with the history of Sashiko?
I want to know because it's fascinating.
Well, Sashiko has been around for a long time, and it is really a Japanese technique. Perhaps most commonly known, you've seen it on kimonos and on quilts, old Japanese textiles. You've seen the koi fish jumping in their ponds and the waves and the cranes. All of those things are very traditional stitches. Also, it's been seen in China as well. It's a very, very ancient form of hand stitching. When this machine does it all by itself, those of us who have sewn all of our life, we have worn our thumb joints completely out. And so I love this machine because it hand sews for me.
I love it.
This beautiful little stitch, as you can see, you can change the length of the stitch and you can change the length of the space. And so you can have a big long stitch and a short little space, or vice versa, or any combination in between. And it all looks quite beautiful. This applique is done just applying a piece of linen onto another piece of linen using that sweet, simple little stitch. These are all the things that I like to do with the Sashiko machine. I call this double flip stitch cording, and these three first pieces are all done with the same technique, and they all look very different. The reason why they look different is because the stitch space length has been changed. It's a greater space length here than it is here or even here. So with each time I have changed the length of that space, I have given my Sashiko flip stitch cording a new look. I've used a braiding guide to sew on just a simple little piece of ribbon trim, and that is really a fun little technique to do for all kinds of garments, clothes, and home decor. This is a piece of yarn that we have flip stitched, single flip stitch is what I call it, and flip stitch that yarn in place very nicely. This little applique is actually reverse shadow work. You can see from the back that there's fabric on the back, and it has a single flip stitch cording that goes all the way around it. This is actually embroidery floss. And what I did was I ironed that embroidery floss after I flip stitched cording on it to give it that re-embroidered look. And believe it or not, Martha, Sashiko machine can do cross stitching. Isn't that cool?
It is absolutely fascinating. The whole concept is fascinating.
I think so too.
Hand sewing from a machine.
And what I want to show you today is how to actually make these beautiful little pleats using the Sashiko machine. As you can see, they can be very constructed, tightly packed together in dents for a more constructed garment, or they can be very fluid and soft and shapely like our jacket. So would you like to watch me do that today?
I would very much like to watch you. Thank you, Evy.
What we're going to do here is I've started with a piece of fabric that has a base line drawn onto it, and then I have my lines where I will actually stitch the pleats down to, and my lines are spaced evenly so that my pleats will be spaced evenly. And what I'm going to do is always start at the very top of my base line, the very end of the line I have been drawn. I will grasp the fabric on the right side of the foot, and I'm using anything that's sharp and pointed to do so. I'm pushing the fabric up toward the needle. I'm grasping it on the left with my left hand, I'm taking a stitch over that little hump of fabric and then a space. And then I'm going to grasp that fabric again and push it up towards the needle, taking a stitch and a space, and a stitch and a space. And I'm making sassy pleats.
That is so fascinating.
And you can get really going at a clip if you want to.
Very good.
Let me show you how to do flip stitch cording right quick.
Flip stitch cording that
Isn't that
you
neat?
showed. Let's see. Is that complicated?
It's very easy. You just
Okay.
slide the cording right up to the needle, stitch over it, take a space. Double flip stitch is when you cross both of them, flipping one to the
this
left
is double flip stitch
and
here.
one to the
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And we're stitching over the cross stitches and we take a space. Stitch over the cross stitches and take a space. Single flip stitching is stitching over one cording and taking a space. And just side by side, flipping back and forth. And then we have couched on our cording using the Sashiko machine.
Well, I think those are absolutely fascinating. And Evy, thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to know the history of the Sashiko too. And now Evy has some sewing inspirations to share with you. Evy, you've brought so many beautiful things. Tell us about this beautiful scarf.
Well, those are sassy pleats. That's just cut silk velvet that I've stitched a piece of sassy pleats in it and lined it with a little bit of silk chiffon. Put some dollar store tassels on it, but you won't tell anyone that,
No, I will
will
not
you?
tell anyone that you didn't make those on the Sashiko
Yes.
machine. Look at this adorable dress.
And that's using that sweet little Sashiko stitch to make it look like the butterflies and the dragonflies are fluttering around the dress. And the hem of it, that's put on using a double bias binder.
With the Sashiko machine again. Wow,
Yes.
I thought, wait a minute, there it is on the little hem too. Oh, looks like smocking, but I'm going to be willing to bet
Sassy pleats.
Oh,
It
sassy
sure
pleats.
is. And there's little Sashiko stitching on the bottom.
On the bottom with
Rather
the rick-rack.
sassy little dress, wouldn't you say?
It was a rather sassy little dress, yes. Oh, I think you told me about the cross stitch a few minutes
cross-stitching.
ago. Look at this. Little boy's suit with
A little
the
boy's John.
Sashiko cross
Sashiko
stitch.
stitching.
And some more rick-rack, which is
Yes,
adorable.
and that's also applied with Sashiko stitching.
I see. I'll tell you, that's just wonderful. Now, here is a little bit more of the traditional
It is.
look,
This
isn't
is
it?
a little table runner. Made for autumn, it has Sashiko stitch pumpkins and leaves and a little bit of flip stitch cording right there on the sides. And it's
How
quilted
pretty.
with Sashiko stitching. There's a bit of batting in that. So as you see, it does apply to quilting as well.
Absolutely beautiful. Oh my goodness, look at this.
And that is my first little Sashiko quilt. And I used organdy fabric on linen background and just stitched like mad across it with Sashiko stitching and a bit of padding behind it.
Just beautiful. And even a baby bonnet. Oh, you know how I love the baby bonnets with the silk
Silk Dupioni.
and the most
And
beautiful
sassy
stitching.
pleats.
And let me turn it around. Just that little casing in the back.
Yes.
Evy, thank you for bringing these
You're
beautiful
welcome.
things. And now Evy has a So Quick, So Easy project to share with you. Evy, these flowers are just beautiful. Tell us about them. Oh,
Well, those are silk organza flowers all made in the hoop. Those are pansies and violets. And I put them on a little knit shawl that my mother made.
oh, well, how pretty, both the shawl and the pansies. And then a wonderful embellishment on this hat.
That's a current project that I'm teaching. There's a
Oh.
silk organza and velvet rose. There are some silk violets and a little silk pansy on there. That would look beautiful on you.
Oh, thank you. I used to love to wear big hats, especially when I was in high school. Show us those beautiful
These
flowers,
are
Evy.
some more
Oh.
samples of what you do. You notice I've added a little bit of fancy stuff behind that pansy to make them pretty and behind this pansy to make it pretty. Just a little antique lace and trimmings. This is another rose that's made just out of silk organza. This is a hydrangea bloom, and I'm actually using a puff behind the petals. The puff, it makes this 3D flower even more 3D. These are the flowers applied to a card, just a little example of what you can do with them. I'm going to show you how to do it. When we hoop fabric, normally we never tug or pull on it in the hoop, but when we're sewing silk organza flowers, we want our fabric to be very taut in the hoop. So it's important that you really tug it and pull it, get it nice and tight.
Now, is that 2 layers of organza?
It's a layer of silk organza and a
Okay.
layer of silk velvet. The silk organza actually acts as its stabilizer.
Okay, silk velvet?
Silk velvet and silk
Okay,
organza.
interesting. Okay.
And then this little board shows you all the petals that we have stitched out. You notice that I have trimmed them closely, just as close as I can possibly get to the stitching, using little tiny trimming scissors. And once I have all of my pieces trimmed out, then I start building my flower. And I'm starting with this little puff right here. It's turned itself upside down. But this little circle, I've made a little granny cap out of it, put a little fiber fill in it, pulled it up tight, and I've wrapped one layer of petals around it. Now I'm wrapping the second layer of petals around it. Now I'm adding the third and fourth layer, and finally the fifth and sixth layer, and the leaves. And I have a beautiful silk velvet rose, all finished, ready to be applied to any number of wonderful sewing projects.
Or just with a little pin on the back to be worn as a brooch. Evie, those are absolutely beautiful. I'm amazed always at what we can do with a machine that embroiders. That's exactly right. Evie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you,
It's been a
Martha.
pleasure having you here. And now we have some heirloom quilting to share with you. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today Nina McVeigh. Nina is an educator trainer for Bernina of America. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha.
And I think we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics today, crazy patch or crazy quilts. I see you've got some beautiful, beautiful patchwork. And I think you did these in the hoop. Is that what I heard you?
That's right.
That's the fun, easy way to do it.
It is.
And the most fun, of course, is embellishing. Go ahead and take it away.
You're right. Sometimes you do crazy patch just so you can embellish.
That's right.
And today I'm going to embellish by doing bobbin play. So I'm using silk ribbon, but I've put that in the bobbin of my machine to create that embellished look. So here I have a crazy patch block, and this little seam, it's not a seam, it's just a decorative stitch. It's the feather stitch, but I've done it with that 4mm silk ribbon in my bobbin. And when you look at this, it really looks like it maybe could have been done by hand.
Absolutely.
And then this little area here with the little flowers and a little bit of pink in there. And I look at this, it is an embellishment with silk ribbon. I want to embellish it even further with beads. The embellishing part is never done. You just want to keep going. You can use silk ribbon in your bobbin. Here I have a 4mm silk ribbon. And if you are going to use this, I do hand wind my bobbins. Now I've got a nice large bobbin, so if I hand wind this, it is going to go nice and far. You don't have to worry quite as much about running out every row of stitching. I also have a 2mm silk ribbon. This you can wind by hand, or some bobbin winders will allow you to use that, but I kind of like to even wind this one by hand just to keep it flat and so that it doesn't twist. And then pearl cotton is another great option. Pearl cotton works really well in your bobbin. With pearl cotton, I do wind that on my machine with my bobbin winder. This pearl cotton is really nice to use because it has a little bit of sparkle in it. It has a gold thread running through it. And then, of course, you'll want to keep a nice large eyed needle handy, because when you do this type of embellishing, especially through the layers that are created when you do the crazy patch, you'll want that nice large needle to thread and carry your ribbon or your pearl cotton to the back side of your fabric. So let me show you on the machine exactly what that's going to look like. As I mentioned before, or as Martha mentioned, these blocks are done in the embroidery unit, and once you do this, there's always a machine stitch being done over a seam. You can choose to skip that machine stitch, and that's exactly what I've done on this block, and because I knew that I wanted to do the bobbin play here. So I've put my bobbin in the machine. On some machines you may need a secondary bobbin case. On my machine I've just been able to bypass the tension, so I have no tension on my bobbin. Some people will want to increase their upper tension. You'll have to do, this is a little bit of playing before you know exactly what this is going to look like. You notice I've turned my block upside down. You have to remember to do this from the back side. And so I've got this line of stitching that I can see from when I joined this piece of fabric on my Crazy Patch block. So I'm going to follow that line. I know exactly where to stitch. I have chosen the feather stitch, and I'm just going to stitch this out. Part of the, I don't know if I want to say fun, part of the mystery is not really knowing what this is going to look like until you get done, and then you have to turn it over and admire your work. So we're going to do this row. And when we're finished, I'm not going to use the thread cutter on my machine because of that ribbon. I am just simply going to turn this over. And you can see that feather stitch in silk ribbon.
And looks exactly like hand feather stitch.
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful. Oh, and I bet you're going to put some beads right on top of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, Nina, thank you so very much. And now we have some hand embroidery to share with you. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today my very dear friend, Gloria McKinnon. Gloria is an internationally known teacher. She's the author of 16 books. For 18 years, the presenter of the weekly needlework segments on the Today Show in Australia. She's the editor of many Australian quilting and embroidery magazines and a regular contributor to So Beautiful magazine. Gloria, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Martha. Today I'm going to share one of my favourite stitches. It's just a loop stitch, but it's a stitch that I think of as my signature flower because I use it on every block, on any block that I do, on any quilt.
Every block?
Every block. I always put it in some way on there. And so as we can see there, it's a really simple one. I'd like to show you here, though, that this is it if we look at it done with a 2mm ribbon, and I've just got a really very small bead in the centre of that. And then this is how it looks when we do it with 4mm, and that's what we were just looking at there, was the 4mm one. And then it gets a little bit larger when we work with the 7mm silk ribbon. And then when we do the 13mm silk ribbon, we get, you know, a really nice loopy flower. And then when we work in this one with the 13mm, still the same width as that, but this one's the old seam binding, and we over dye this, and so then we get these wonderful colours and then end up with this flower. So if I show, coming back to how we actually do it, we need to put a centre in first. So it can be a bead or it can be a French knot, and I've chosen to use a bead today for no reason other than, you know, that's what I've got, it's a bead. So we need to come out the distance away from the centre. Now, it needs to be minuscule, and I think this is probably the trick for people that get into difficulties with it. You can use a laying tool, and when you lay that down on there, that's the laying tool. You can use, but you know, the truth is, anything will work. I mean, it can be something as easy as this for home that you would lay there. So I'm going to show off today, though, and I'm going to use the laying tool, and I'm going to lay it there across this here. And I think that I'll take it back this way, show you one thing that could go wrong, is if you lay it like this, it's not going to work in the same way. We actually want it to be so that we have equal amounts of ribbon coming out on either side. So we would lay it like that, and then we would come over as close to the centre as we can. And the reason I chose the bead today was because I definitely won't pierce the centre. And then we just pull that over. And so the laying tool has held it up at the height.
Holds it up,
right.
okay.
Now I hold my thumb on there so it can't go anywhere if my thumb is on it. And then I need to move around a really short distance. So I just would like to share so that you can see just how close the distance is away from there. And so then we come back down into really close to the centre. So my needle is actually up against the bead, and then I'm going to put my laying tool in there, and then I'm going to pull the ribbon over the laying tool. And then that way each petal will be the same height. That's the reason for using the laying tool. And see, already I'm starting to get this nice pretty little puffy flower coming around again, just doing the same again, but I think it's important that we get to see how it looks when it's completed. Now, you probably guessed that, you know, when you've been making these for as long as I have, you actually can eyeball it. You don't always need this laying tool. It's just, I think that when you're a beginner, you know, it's good to use that laying tool, you know, to lay there to make it work. And so then I would pull that one in. Then I need another one here. And back down to there. And then if we just assume that I have been all the way around that one, it would then look like this. Because I would like to come down to this one and just show you, I've not learned anything new, it's the same technique. I've used a tool to put a hole in my work there, and then I'm just going to pull this through. It's actually the same bite of fabric, it's still a really tiny bite of fabric that I have there, and then I've got these big loops like that, and then if I just take a small amount of water, and I always call this, you know, giving it a perm. I'm just going to take this little bit of water, and I'm just going to scrunch it. If I just scrunch this, and because it's the old rayon seam binding, because in another world I'd probably use 2 hands, wouldn't I? And I'd wet both of them, but I'm not sure how to do that here. So let's just go with that. And so if we look at that all sort of scrunched and mushed up there, when that dries, that's going to look then the same as this one here, because this one was done earlier, of course, and then it's dried. And so then in the center, when this is dry, you could then put a very large bead. It could just be a faceted bead, if that's what you like, a single faceted bead, or you could use lots of loopy ones, as I've done there with beads. And so you would just come through from the back, and you would use the beading thread and put beads in the center. Is that good?
Gloria, it is truly beautiful, and it looks like several different flowers,
Yes.
although really all
with the one technique.
with
yes,
the one
technique.
Oh, Gloria, thank you so very much for being here with me today.
Thanks again.
And
Martha.
now I'd like to share a piece from my vintage collection with you. Sometimes I see a piece that is just absolutely beautiful, and when I go to buy the piece, I think, oh, we're going to reproduce all of this in machine embroidery for our beloved friends and customers. However, when I really started examining, I thought, well, this is probably a little bit too much, but it might not be. It's an all-over piece, and I believe it was purchased that way, with some of the most beautiful Swiss embroidery you have ever seen. Coming down the skirt, as you can see, the absolute beauty, the roses, that has eyelets, it has well, it's just gorgeous. But it was all in one piece, I believe. Originally, I thought it had been stitched together, but I think it was an all-over fabric, which those fabrics are still available today sometimes. See how it comes all the way down to the bottom? It's absolutely beautiful. Those little eyelets, I think it would probably take too long to do that with machine embroidery, but it really is pretty, and it really was a good idea I had. The back, of course, is just like the front. Once again, this is, I think I've told you several times, sometimes I buy pieces and I think creatively this would make a beautiful christening dress, and indeed this petticoat cut off here with a little bodice would make a beautiful christening dress, and as a matter of fact I might use it for that one day. Isn't that gorgeous? For our Sewing from the Heart today, I have a letter from Phyllis Lewis, who lives in Kansas City. And she says, Dear Martha, there's an internet group, Quilters for Comfort, that makes quilts for different causes. Their latest project was making personalized quilts for 2 grade school classes in different schools. For the past 3 years, some of the members of the group have met in Kansas City to spend a week making patriotic quilts for veterans and active duty military members. The week in Kansas City is called SewFest. Members of the group who cannot attend send blocks and supplies to help make the quilts. I have just recently joined this group and I have been really impressed. Sincerely, Phyllis Lewis. Phyllis, it's amazing how many people are doing volunteer sewing with quilting, how many people are going into schools and teaching children how to quilt. Not so much quilt, but put the pieces together. And a very easy project to do is just to cut up small pieces, various sizes, fix blocks, and take the pieces and let children kind of, use the school glue and glue them down, and then you go home and zigzag them and put it together, and those children in that classroom have made a quilt. That's a fun project. Ask me how I know. I've tried it. Phyllis, thank you for writing about your group, Quilters for Comfort, and thank you for all that you are doing. And now I want to thank you for joining me in my sewing room today. I hope you've had a good time. I would very much like to invite you to come back next time.